First on BBC One.
I still get goosebumps watching that intro. It's absolutely brilliant. That is the magic of Amish Phil from the Amish Inquisition, who put that together for me at the start of the CV. It's absolutely brilliant. Good evening and welcome to episode 38 of the History CV of Britain. I'm your host, Paul, and this evening I'll be talking to Adrian Gilbert, somebody that we've had on the channel a few times now. Always love speaking to Adrian. I've billed this as Esoteric Christianity, and we'll be talking about that. But we'll also be talking about King Arthur and lots of other magical things. So lots to look forward to. I'm only going to mention a couple of books this evening before I bring Adrian on. The first one is this one, which is Nennius's Historia Brittonum, which I've almost got to the end of now. And it's been a very, very interesting read. So it covers Brutus and it covers King Arthur. It confirms that Britain derived its name from Brutus. It confirmed that we gave Julius Caesar and the Romans a good spanking on two separate occasions. It tells the story of the British King Vortigern and the Saxon invaders. And I'm beginning to ask questions. Why were the Saxons so intent on invading these lands? What was going on? So we're given like the basic facts in these history books, but there must have been a lot more going on. Anyway, so there's that. And King Arthur in this edition, because I'm aware that there's various editions of Nennius. In this particular edition, Arthur turns up towards the end. And Nennius talks about the 12 battles that Arthur had with the Saxons and lists all the places where they were alleged to have happened. But there's no mention here of Arthur not being a king yet. So that particular quote that Richard told me about last week is not in this edition, which I'm a bit disappointed about. So I've not quite finished it yet, but I have enjoyed it. And hopefully I'll be doing a special on Nennius's book with Richard Johnson and hopefully Peter Chesborough of Britain's Hidden History. Fingers crossed that happens. One more book to mention. This is a bit heavy, literally. P.D. Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. Now, I know what you're all thinking, but this is not actually a book about the life of my wife before she met me. There's no need for that. That's just rude. This is to do with Gurdjieff. Ouspensky was Gurdjieff's, I think, favourite pupil, and Gurdjieff was a philosopher in the early part of the 20th century and toured the Middle East, trying to find the original teachings of Jesus. And that's something that I'll be speaking to Adrian about this evening. So there we are. There we go. Okay. I think, yeah, that's everything. So I'll now bring on my guest for this evening. Please give a very warm welcome to Adrian Gilbert.
Hello, hello. How are you doing, Paul?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well indeed. So I've been really looking forward to getting stuck into esoteric Christianity with you for some time now. So I'm very excited about this. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask you about your invisible college that I'm a member of.
Yes.
Because I understand that you're revamping the college. So
yes, I am.
Yeah, so what can existing members like myself and newcomers expect from the new look college, Adrian?
Right. Well, I started the Invisible College originally, give a little history lesson, back in 2008, long time ago now. There was a little radio station called EMTV. I don't know if you ever came across that. Stood for East Midlands TV. And they were based in Milton Keynes. And they had some spare, a spare studio, and they decided they were going to put on an esoteric broadcasting station on the Sky platform.
Okay.
And I was in contact with them, and they asked me if I'd like to do an hour show, sort of once a month, on esotericism. So that's how the Invisible College was born. Because I called it the Invisible College, partly because of the original Invisible College in the 1640s. You've probably heard of the forerunner of what became the Royal Society. It was during the Cromwellian period when scientists would get together and then they'd distribute the minutes of their meeting by post all over Europe. So it was a college, but it didn't have premises. It was invisible.
Yes.
And I quite like the idea of invisible on the airwaves, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a college, but it's not like Cambridge or Oxford or something. It's invisible. And I like the idea of people from all over the world being able to access this through the internet, because there was an internet connection as well. But the internet was pretty primitive in 2008. EMTV's gone by the wayside long ago, but the internet carried on. And I decided to put my own version of this actually as a website. First of all, I had a website. Then I worked a little bit, but then I got into the idea of using YouTube instead of me having to do all the works, setting everything up and so on. Let them do it. And the original Visible College was mostly just lectures in written form on the internet.
Right.
So I wanted to do it all video, if possible, because that's more how people take their information now. So that's kind of grown. I've got about 200 lectures on the YouTube, and I set up a Patreon group for people to join. So I do them newsletters and talk about the videos. But I always had it in mind to develop this as a true esoteric school. And the way an esoteric school works is it has, you could think of it as circles within circles. So you have an outer circle, or beyond the outer circle, you would call the exoteric. It's outside. And that's like books and articles and people hearing about things through conversations and gossip and so on. And that in turn, if you hear enough of this kind of stuff, people start becoming searchers. And then they start wanting to find the truth. This is what happened to me, you know. I started out back in about 69, I think. 69, 70, I'm an old man, you know. And I got into Gurdjieff and Uspensky, their books. Later on, I met one of their pupils, a guy called J.G. Bennett.
Oh, yes, I've heard of him. Yeah.
And I went down to see him. He was running an esoteric school of his own. by that time in Sherborne. He's a very interesting man.
He was a pupil of Gurdjieff's, was he?
Both, yeah. He met Gurdjieff in 1920 in Constantinople, as it was then. Bennett at that time was an intelligence officer. He was running the British intelligence for the whole Near East.
Wow.
And he ended up at the age of 21 with the rank of lieutenant colonel. Can you believe that?
No.
And he could speak 12 languages.
Wow.
I mean, he was a very clever guy, and he was also a brilliant mathematician. So anyway, he met Gurdjieff then, but he joined Uspensky's group in London. By that time, Uspensky and Gurdjieff had split. They'd gone their separate ways. Gurdjieff settled in France. Uspensky settled in Britain.
Mm-hmm. And
Uspensky made it a rule that his pupils were not to correspond with Gurdjieff and his pupils.
Really?
It's all a bit weird. And
is it because they'd fallen out with each other?
Well, they had, yeah. I think the reality was that Uspensky needed to make a living. I mean, he was a Russian emigre. They'd had the Russian Revolution, and he was a white Russian, which meant he was against the Marxists. He was sort of an old Russian, and he came to England as an immigrant, as a refugee, and he needed to make a living. And he soon found out, this is my own opinion, right, that although he knew a lot about esotericism in general, he'd been into it for quite a long time, but he found out that what people really wanted was this Gurdjieff stuff. So he maintained the idea that Gurdjieff had found this precious ancient knowledge. And so there was the man Gurdjieff, who he didn't really like very much, and he didn't like the direction he had taken his work, talking about God. I mean, Uspensky really wasn't into that idea. He was a scientist, and he was much more, I suppose, more 20th century in his outlook, whereas Gurdjieff was more romantic in the way he looked at things. So he separated the man Gurdjieff from the ideas, and he said, well, this man had brought these ideas back, but I'm going to teach these ideas without the man. Gurdjieff always referred to it as his ideas, and I think this was probably a major factor. Eventually, he wrote, Uspensky wrote the book In Search of the Miraculous you're talking about. And Gurdjieff was absolutely delighted when he saw it. He said, when he was shown a copy of this, I guess probably in Russian, originally, Gurdjieff could speak Russian and Turkish and Greek and one or two other languages. He said, yesterday I hated him, now I love him. It was very accurate what he's done. It's very good, very good work. And it is an absolutely brilliant book. Uspensky was a brilliant writer. He had his own ideas as well, but he was very faithful to what he had been taught in Moscow by Gurdjieff. They were in Moscow together a lot. Anyway, that's a brief introduction to them. I wanted to read you out something, if you don't mind. If I
yes, of course. Please do.
If I can get my Kindle to go on. Cancel that. Yes. Yes, so this is from another of Uspensky's books. And it's very much to do with the search for truth. He wrote this other book, In Search of the Miraculous. That is actually the title of an essay in this other book.
Okay.
Borrowed for his title of his other book. Anyway, he's talking about the search for knowledge and what brings you onto the path, as it were. So I'm going to read you, this is how he begins his book. In chapter 1. The idea of a knowledge which surpasses all ordinary human knowledge and is inaccessible to ordinary people, but which exists somewhere and belongs to somebody, permeates the whole history of the thought of mankind from the most remote periods. And according to certain memorials of the past, a knowledge quite different from ours formed the essence and content of human thought at these times when, according to other opinions, man differed very little or did not differ at all from animals. Hidden knowledge, in quotes, is therefore sometimes called ancient knowledge. But of course, this does not explain anything. It must, however, be noted that all religions, all myths, all beliefs, all popular heroic legends of all peoples and all countries are based on a recognition of the existence, sometime and somewhere, of a knowledge far superior to the knowledge which we possess or can possess. And to a considerable degree, the content of all religions and myths consists of symbolic forms which represent attempts to transmit the idea of this hidden knowledge. On the other hand, nothing demonstrates so clearly the weakness of human thought or human imagination as existing ideas as to the content of hidden knowledge. The word, the concept, the idea, the expectation exist, but there are no definite concrete forms of percept connected with this idea. And the idea itself has very often to be dug out with great difficulty from beneath mountains of lies, both intentional and unintentional, from deception and self-deception, and from naive attempts to present in intelligible forms adopted from ordinary life that which in its very nature can have no resemblance to them. Now we're coming to the crux of it. The work of finding traces of ancient or hidden knowledge, or even hints of its existence, resembles the work of archaeologists looking for traces of some ancient forgotten civilization and finding them buried beneath several strata of cemeteries left by peoples who have since lived in that place, separated possibly by thousands of years and unaware of one another's existence. But on every occasion that an investigator comes upon the attempts to express in one way or another the content of hidden knowledge, he invariably sees the same thing, namely the striking poverty of human imagination in the face of this idea. So it goes on. So we have to understand that there is, or we have this perception or feeling maybe, that there's something out there. What is the meaning of life? Why am I here? Yeah, it can't be just so I go to work, I do my 9 to 5, I get paid, I go to Tesco and I buy my groceries and cook supper, and then tomorrow is going to be the same. And the weekend, if I'm not too exhausted, maybe go out somewhere. There's got to be more to life than this. There must be some purpose to life. And that's where the quest for knowledge begins. It begins with this feeling there's got to be something else. I've been to school. They've taught me what they were going to teach me. I've been to university. They've taught me what they were going to teach me. And I end up, what am I doing? 9 to 5. And even if I make stacks of money, what's the point of that? You don't need to eat more than 3 meals a day, do you? You need one bed to sleep in. You don't need a huge amount. So the idea of becoming a billionaire, what's the point? There must be something else. And that something else starts people looking for something else. Back in the 1960s and the 1970s, as I say, I've sort of came into this path, you could say, about 1969 when I was at university. I was studying science. I was doing a chemistry degree. And I realized that it was all built on sand, that what I had taken to be truth, what I had taken to be absolute fact, was actually someone else's theory. And there were theories piled upon theories upon theories. Your guy last week was talking, he was saying how these alternative people in there doing this stuff about KingArthur, they make it some proposition and then they treat that as being fact, and they build other facts like Alan Whistler does this kind of thing. I was irate when I heard this. because that's exactly what the academics do. And then they put a castle wall around it and they won't let you challenge it.
Okay, I don't want to digress too much, but
Yes.
I think that with Richard and what I've personally found, by the way, there's an echo going on, Adrian. I think it might be at your end.
It's
I can
probably
hear myself echoing in your room.
Yeah.
Let's just
might
see.
be better if I put earphones on. Will that be all right?
Oh, that might do it. Yeah,
I'll try
thank you.
that. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So what was I saying? So I think this is something that I found from reading a little bit of Wilson and Blackett. I've not read the whole thing yet. That they tend to speculate a little bit at times. Well,
more than a little.
So I think that's what Richard was getting at last week.
Yeah. Yes, well, he was, but this is actually what all of science does. Mostly we don't know, the whole theory of evolution. The word theory should be something to wake us up. Well, it's only a theory, guys, and yet you challenge that theory, you're called a moron. You're called an idiot.
Have you come across the idea of genetic manipulation that's kind of tied in with the theory of evolution, that possibly at times we've been genetically manipulated?
Well, you're meaning about extraterrestrials coming here and interfering with the apes on this planet. Well, that again is a theory, It's a different theory, but my view is that something as even a single cell amoeba, right? A single cell amoeba is such a complex thing that, well, how are you saying that's climbed out of the mud of its own accord through just using chemistry? Something's created that. Intelligence has created it. Whether you say it's the intelligence of an alien, a guy that looks a bit maybe like us, but he's got green skin, came along and made this thing, or whether you talk about an invisible God who creates it, there's an intelligence. Mind creates. And I don't see that you can make something incredibly complicated like life without there being intelligence driving it.
I would definitely agree.
And you can work out what that intelligence is. That's another question. But the interplay between mind and matter is there. I mean, that's something that's been denied by material science for the last over 100 years, probably 150 years, or since the 1880s when Darwin was around. The idea that it's self-generated, sui generis, self-generated life, and then it just by chance evolved, is totally irrational and impossible.
I couldn't agree more.
The DNA code shows that.
Brilliant.
Anyway, I don't want to go down that path. We're talking about
before we hit esotericism, can we just briefly skirt over Arthur, because you brought up last week's episode that we did. So one of Richard Johnson's criticisms was that Wilson and Blackett ignored all the modern scholarly work on King Arthur. They only consulted with the ancient Welsh sources. And he also believes that the Brut Tacilio was probably written after Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain. So would you care to comment on any of that, Adrian?
Yes. The Brut Tacilio is, if it were written after Geoffrey of Monmouth, it would be a précis.
No,
you know what a précis is? No. You take a longer thing and make a shorter version of it.
Yeah.
You cut down, you remove material from it, and you shrink it down. So it would be a précis. So you have to assume that someone had a copy of Geoffrey of Monmouth, and they say, well, this is too long. I don't like the language. I'm going to précis it down. On the other hand, if you read it, the Brut Tacilio as it is, it's an annal. It's basically telling you what happened in sequence, and it's very dry compared with Geoffrey. And Geoffrey tells us he had this ancient book he was asked to translate from the ancient British language into Latin. And he said, I've done it. I've done it in my flowery style. So he takes little, episodes. For instance, Arviragus marries Genuissa. In the Bruticilio, it just tells you that. Arviragus married Genuissa. But in Geoffrey's version, it becomes, oh, they were so in love, and she was so beautiful. It was such a wonderful occasion. He builds it up. He romanticizes it.
Yeah.
Now, the other comments I would make is that certain words in the Bruticilio make sense, right? I'll give you an example. In the Bruticilio, it tells you the founder of Shaftesbury. I used to live near Shaftesbury in Dorset. And it says that a guy called Radhad Hudibras founded Shaftesbury. That's in Geoffrey's version, Radhad Hudibras. You think, what the heck's that? But in the Bruticilio, it says it's a Ron Palador Fras.
Right.
Right. Now, I'm not a Welsh speaker, but from what I've seen and other people translated that, Ron means a spear. Yeah. Palador is a spear or shaft. And Fras means thick. So it's a spear with a thick shaft. And that's why it's called Shaftesbury. Because where the king had his throne, your scepter was a spear. And the old name for Shaftesbury was Sceptersburg in Anglo-Saxon. Yeah, it's the fortress of the scepter. So it makes sense in the Bruticilio that this guy would have founded Shaftesbury. It makes no sense, Radhad Hudibras. What does that mean?
Yeah,
It doesn't mean anything in Geoffrey. It's like Geoffrey mistook. Maybe the copy wasn't very clear, or maybe he was concealing something. And in the Bruticilio, the sword Excalibur, is called Caladfulch, which means the hard cleft.
Right. Okay.
Right. Now, I imagine that what we're talking about here is a sword, probably made with pattern welding. Where you bind rods together and hammer them out, and you get this lovely shiny. The Vikings are very good at this, but I think it was invented probably in Wales.
Yeah.
Very likely because they had iron and they had coal, and I don't believe the people had not learned fairly early on that if you take these black stones, which would have been in the hillsides at the time, and put them on a fire, they burn and give you good heat. So the hard cleft was probably a sword far superior to ordinary swords, and you hit another sword with it, it breaks it.
Yeah.
Very good quality sword. So that makes sense in the Bruticilio. But Caliburn, it doesn't make any sense at all. So I'll leave that with you. And there's other examples like this. And it indicates to me, first of all, that the Bruticilio precedes Geoffrey. And second, that Geoffrey didn't understand certain words in it. And he wrote this flowery translation. And he also included a second, he tells us he included a second book, The Prophecies of Merlin, and he puts them in the requisite place. So he gets criticized. Oh, well, it's all invented. Prophecies of Merlin. Dismiss the whole lot. Well, it's two different books. One is the Welsh Annals of some sort. And Cecilia wouldn't have written it. What happened with the annals is each generation adds their bit. And then they copy out what's gone before, and then they add the bits from their own time. So you have a whole series of different writers over hundreds of years putting this thing together. So to say, well, it can't be a Cecilio, he was too early or too late or whatever. He was just one in the path. And it's probably Gildas was one of the people who wrote that, because Gildas gets a lot of praise from the people of his time, and afterwards, or the wonderful historian Gildas. Well, you read the book that's come down to us of Gildas, and you think, well, what's all this praise about? It's very short for a start, and it's not that clear, and it's a Jeremiah. It's all complaining and moaning. That's not exactly a great history, but we're told in other places that he was angry with Arthur, and he took all his books and threw them in the sea. Right, yeah. So we've only got perhaps this moaning Jeremiah left over. So I'll leave it with you. But my personal opinion is that the Welsh were very good at writing. The other thing I'll say, I want to move on from this, but your writer, he's criticizing us for not reading their modern interpretations. But a good historian goes to the earliest sources he can find, if you can. What was written yesterday by him or some other contemporary historian is their opinion based on whatever those sources are. Yes, some archaeology is worth looking at, but unless they found some new texts, and I noticed he didn't even mention them once, the genealogies. Has he been? I've been to the British Museum, and I've actually read or looked through anyway the Harleian 3859, and I looked at the genealogies actually in the actual book, which goes back to the 900s. And I looked at the actual book to see what it actually said. Has he done that? And there are other genealogies that you can get.
Okay. Well, before we move on, Adrian, I should just say that Richard has made a comment in the chat box. So I'll read it to you. Right. He says, but Adrian, BYB also has these improvements, and they are universally regarded as copies of the Latin HRB, even by Iolo Morganwg. Welsh copyists improved their source material.
Well, good for them. But it's even better to have a look at the original as much as you can. But, I don't take that criticism that we don't look at the sources. And I'm not so... Let's get this clear. I'm not an Arthurian expert. I don't claim to be. I'm not Wilson and Blackett. I was very excited to hear about their work, particularly what they'd done with their excavations on top of Mynydd the Gair. I don't agree with all of their conclusions. I don't agree with a lot of their other stuff, but I was very interested in what they'd found there. And I've come to the conclusion that Coiti, the lordship of Coiti, is the real Avalon. And if you read my Blood of Avalon book, you understand that. But I'm not an expert on, and I'm not an expert because it doesn't interest me that much. What interests me about the Arthurian material, it leads you to the quest for the Holy Grail.
Okay.
And it's the quest for the Holy Grail is what's important. And that's what I've been on all my life.
Have you found the Holy Grail, Adrian?
That would be telling, wouldn't it?
Okay. I'll try again at some point.
It means you've got to know what you're talking about when you talk about the Holy Grail. It's not a cut, I'll tell you that.
Okay. Okay, well, that's a good point, I suppose, for us to move on to esoteric Christianity. So could you explain to us, to start with, in basic terms, what esoteric Christianity is?
Yes. Now, back in the 1960s and 70s, as I say, a lot of people were waking up. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, all that. People were starting to, what's really going on? And they started looking beyond the church. Before that, if you were interested in, in truth, in spiritual truth, you looked within the church, or you certainly looked within the Bible. You didn't look outside of that. People started thinking, well, we don't know what's going on here. And I look at my local vicar, and he doesn't look very enlightened. Or the Pope, he doesn't look enlightened either. Or the Archbishop of Canterbury. There must be someone who knows more. So they start looking there in the East. They say, well, these Eastern blokes, they seem to have something going, don't they? They've got all this yoga and the martial arts, and they can stick things to their cheek without pain. They got something going. I go and find out about them. I'll find a guru. And that was my feeling. So, I think it was 1972. A friend of mine and I, we bought a couple of bicycles. And here's a tip. If you want a cheap bicycle, the police have auctions of stolen bikes. They have so many bikes that don't get claimed that they can't build them and you put them in the shed forever. They run out of space, so they auction them off.
Please carry on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I bought a bike from the cops for 10 quid. It was a nice bike, Someone had painted it to cover up what it really was, but it was almost new with the derailleur gears and everything. And my friend did the same, and we set out we wanted to get to Bethlehem in time for Christmas. And this was September, the beginning of September. So we set out cycling. We cycled down through Kent, took the Channel Ferry, and then started cycling through France. We went down through France, but we did a little bit with the trains to get over the hills and get into the Rhone Valley. And cycled down there through Louis Saint-Georges, all these grapevines, these names we've seen on labels, cycling through there and into Italy. Eventually we got down to Brindisi, took the ferry across to Greece. And this is exactly what people going on pilgrimage would have done. They wouldn't have trains or bicycles, but that's the same route they would have taken.
Yeah.
To go down the Rhone Valley and then cross over to Italy and get down to the boot of Italy, or maybe go to Genoa and get a boat there and sail all the way around Italy and to Greece. And then you go from Greece, you could go either direct to the Holy Land or go to Turkey and go down that way. So we went there, and it was an eye-opener for me to be in Israel. And this was in 1972 to 73. I was there about 6 months.
Were you on a kibbutz?
I started off on a kibbutz, picking grapefruits and working in there. Then they had a little factory making air conditioning units, so I did a bit of welding in there as well. But I didn't like kibbutz life. I'm not a sort of commune person. I felt that there's something very strange to me about giving up your freedom for pocket money, guaranteed housing. It makes you weak in a funny way to not take your own position in life.
I agree.
Do you understand that? So I left and I went to Tel Aviv. I went down to Eilat first, and I was going to go and get some work there. There's a lot of construction work there at the time. And my idea was to do some construction, get some money together, take a boat. You could take a boat from there down to Mombasa in Kenya, and then you could get a boat from there to Bombay in India. And I was going to go and find a guru. What was my intention, was to find myself a guru.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a guy in the 70s in India that was huge. Wagwan.
Maharishi.
Not him. There's a guy that.
Bhagwan?
Yes, that's the guy I think I'm thinking of. Yeah,
Bhagwan Maharishi. Yeah, it was a little bit before him. But anyway, while I was in Israel, I ended up in Tel Aviv, and I got a little job there. And I had a second job. I was working partly in a youth hostel, sort of making breakfasts and dinners and things there. It paid me a bit of money, and gave me free accommodation, just as important. And I had a second job in the art school in Tel Aviv as a model. I was better looking in those days. In my early 20s, I had hair, quite long hair actually, and I got to know some of the students, and there was one lady there who was lived in India. I mean, she was handicapped. She was in a wheelchair. Not that matters, but she asked me what I was going to do. And I said, well, I'm going to India. I'm going to go and find a guru. I've been doing yoga for a few years, and I'm going to go and see if I can find a guru. I want to find out the truth. She said, oh, Adrian, don't do it. She said, I lived in Delhi. My father was a professor in the university, and we saw so many people, young guys like you coming around, and they didn't understand their own culture. And then they went there and they didn't understand the Indian culture. You can't become a Hindu anyway, you will never integrate there. So they had two sort of half cultures, and they ended up being dropouts and in an awful shape, probably taking drugs and, outcasts. And he said, much better that you go back to your own culture and find out the truth about that. So that motivated me. And I came back to England. I had a second encounter there while I was working in the youth hostel. I've told the story before, you maybe heard it. There was an old man reading his Bible in the corner, and nobody would speak to him. I think he's probably Canadian. And I plucked up courage. Something in me said, go and talk to this guy. So I went to talk to him. I said, it's very interesting being in Israel at this time, when, Israel's come back. He said, Judah's come back, but Israel's yet to come. And I said, what are you talking about? They're back. He said, don't you understand? You've never read your Bible, young man. Of course I haven't. I brought up a Roman Catholic. Oh, well, that explains it. They don't read it. And he said, you have to understand that after the time of Solomon, Israel was split in two. There was a northern kingdom called Israel, 10 tribes. There was a southern kingdom called Judah. Well, the Judeans, they became the Jews. So the Jews who've come back, they're descended from the southern kingdom, but the other ones, the 10 tribes, they're lost to history. And he said, you're descended from them. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, well, you don't know anything, do you? Do you know about the coronation stone that your kings and queens are crowned on? I said, what's that? He said, well, next time you're in London, you go into Westminster Abbey. It wouldn't work now, but you'll see the throne there. It's got this big stone under it called the Stone of Destiny. And you say, well, that's Jacob's pillow stone. So anyway, it got me scratching my head, I'd never heard anything like this before. So I came back to England, and I started researching all sorts of things. And I got a job with a little esoteric publisher called Turnstone Press. And the guy who ran that had himself been a student of Bennett.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Back in the 50s. And he was connected to all sorts of people, and people would come along to the offices, and I met Edgar Case's son, his eldest son, Hugh Lynn. Nobody's met Hugh Lynn. I met Hugh Lynn. He came to our offices where they were talking about getting their distribution. We have met other people, Peter Tompkins, author of the Secrets of the Great Pyramid. I think that's what it's called. I met him. Very intelligent guy. Many other people, and one of the people who came along was Geoffrey Watkins, who was the last Watkins owner of Watkins Bookshop in London. And I asked him, I talked to Geoffrey, and I said, well, Geoffrey, you have all these books you sell. What's your own path? And he says, Christian mysticism. Oh, wow, that's interesting, because to me, Christian mysticism meant hymn books and being holy monks and all of that, which I'd rejected long ago. I didn't understand what he was talking about. He'd published a lot of books on things like alchemy. Why was he doing that? Anyway, not that long after that, I moved from Turnstone. I actually started working at Watkins Bookshop, running their mail order division. So I had access to all these books And down in the basement were some really rare books that the public didn't ever
Wow.
get to see. You know, original first editions of things. So I was able to read a lot of these books. You sort of immersed in it. Everything from theosophy to Sufism to all manner of Hinduism, astrology, palmistry. You know, I ate the lot.
I don't blame you.
But I was already, I'd already read In Search of the Miraculous, and that was what really motivated me.
Okay.
And I met other people who had been involved in that, but I was never a member of an Uspensky or Gurdjieff school as such. I went to meet Bennett, and he took me into his little study, and he said, "Well, sit over there." So I sat down on this wooden chair, a bit hard and uncomfortable, you know. And he sat just, you know, a few feet away. And he said to me, "Adrian," he said, "you're now sitting in the chair Uspensky sat on when he was writing his Search of the Miraculous."
Brilliant.
And I just burst out laughing, you know. It's just the strange tension in the air, the expectation of meeting this man who had known these people. I just burst out laughing. But anyway, we got had a good conversation. He told me at the beginning, "You've got 20 minutes of my time. Use it wisely." So anyway, we had a good conversation, but I started researching all these different areas for myself. And I was involved in one or two things, but things started happening for me. As you know, I started receiving stuff. Eventually, I had an out-of-body experience where I was taken to a higher zone. You could say I met very high entities. So I've had this very strange path, but I've pulled a lot. I've been involved in a lot of esoteric research, both my own and peripherally with other people. For example, I met Robert Boval. I'd written a couple of books. I've written my own book and published that. And I also published an edition of Hermetica, which is the ancient Egyptian texts from the early centuries AD, written in Greek originally, but it's the last flowering of the Egyptian spirit, you could say, before Egypt became Christian and then later on Muslim. And it's a sort of Platonic style in a way, in that you have dialogues between a teacher and a pupil in these Hermetica. But it's quite different from Plato. Plato is very dry and direct. This was very emotional, and you could feel the sort of emotional passion. And I decided I was going to do my own edition of this, but I was going to strip out all the academic stuff, all the notes and the numbering of the paragraphs, all of that. Some of the notes I put into the text in brackets, so you could see it was a note, not the original. But I didn't want people to be distracted academically from actually reading this book as it would have been read by the people who were the students of the college or the school that produced these things. Well, anyway, I was at my distributors. I published, and I had a distributor in Bath who was distributing the books. And I was actually there. I used to do one day a week there as a consultancy basis on marketing and sales. And I happened to be there, and the phone rang, and it turned out to be Robert Boval, who I'd never met. I didn't know anything about him. And we had a very long conversation about all sorts of things, you know, to do with Egypt, to do with Hermetica, to do with Francis Yates, and you know, Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic tradition, and the Medici Academy, and all of these things. And he said, "Well, I've written this book. Would you like to have a look at it and see if you might publish it?" Anyway, to cut a long story short, I went to see him, and I said to him, this book is not publishable. It should be 4 books. You know, it's too much, you know, and you're trying to do too much in one volume. And I said, this stuff you got here about the pyramids and Orion, I think that would be a really popular book. He said, well, that's old work. I was doing that 10 years ago. I'm really into this other stuff. I said, well, believe me, I know a lot about publishing. I've been a rep, you know, selling these kind of books. And I know exactly what works and what doesn't. This Orion and the pyramids and stuff, this is going to be really popular. So I said, well, will you write it with me? So I said, well, okay. And I was going to publish it. One thing led to another. We worked on this book. It took us about a year to write it. But during that time, it took on a life of its own. It took over our lives. And we started meeting people. And we had these extraordinary events where this tape being taped inside the Great Pyramid of the shaft with a little door at the top. The guy who'd done that sent it to Robert. We took it along and we showed it to the guys at the British Museum. You know, we had all of the top archaeologists, the director of the museum, all sitting on their chairs watching this film, which we were custodians of. It was extraordinary. And that, you know, the whole thing led to one thing after another. We ended up making a program with the BBC called The Great Pyramid, Gateway to the Stars. You can still find it on the internet if you probe around. And we went out to Egypt. We filmed this with them. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
But it's a extraordinary high point. But, you know, many strange things like that have happened to me in my life. Strange coincidences, meeting people, finding just the right book, feeling drawn to some place, going there and finding something there. It's like I'm guided. It's, in fact, I am guided. I know I'm guided. Anyway, I put a whole, you know, lot of things together, and I do know now what is the true esoteric Christianity.
Which is?
Do you want me to? Do you want me?
Yes.
Are you ready for the you ready to know
all
what
that
it's
was
about?
absolutely fascinating, Adrian. I really enjoyed listening to you talk about that.
Oh, it was lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for asking me to come on. I hope everyone has enjoyed it.
So what is esoteric Christianity?
Oh, once more. So, you know, esoteric Christianity, you know, you have to understand that Jesus was running an esoteric school. Yeah. He wasn't wearing a big poncho thing. He didn't have a big hat like this, you know, he didn't have a crozier. He was dressed like everybody else, you know, but he was teaching, and he was a teacher who knew. And he had his school, and there was an outer layer, which was all the 4,000 or 5,000 people who would gather around him at Capernaum or the Hill of the Beatitudes, wherever it was. And the reason they come along was they wanted to see a miracle. I mean, wouldn't you imagine you living in Galilee and you're a fisherman, or maybe a small-time farmer or a housewife there. You hear about this guy who could do miracles. Yeah, you're going to go and have a look, can't you? It must have been a
constant dilemma for Jesus, though. I mean, I imagine he must have felt at times like a performer rather than an educator.
Well, yes. But remember, I read you out about Uspensky, and about his famous book is called In Search of the Miraculous. Now, when you start to recognize that there are things we can't explain in this world that are miraculous, if you have any kind of, if you wake up even partially, you've got to want to know what that's all about. It becomes the most important thing in the world. And Jesus refers to it as the pearl of great price. Yeah, If the person discovers there is this pearl, and he'll sell everything he's got for this one pearl, because it's the pearl of great price. And that pearl of great price is the truth. It's the possibility of making your higher body. And the inner teachings of Christianity, you have to understand, he had outer circle. He had a sort of mesoteric circle, that 70 people he sent out, and the people who were sort of associated, but they weren't his inner circle. And he had his 12 apostles. And then within the 12 apostles, there were 3 who were his special guys.
Peter.
Yeah. Peter, Andrew, and John. Yeah. Of them, the highest, I believe, was John. He was the highest initiate of the apostles. So his gospel is the one. That is where you find the esotericism. And the esotericism you find in the first chapter, the first, part of the chapter of John's gospel. And it begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now you have to understand that the Greek word we translate as word is logos. So it's in the beginning was the logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So how does the Word with God is the word that he speaks out. And God gives the command. You read this in the book of Genesis. Let there be light. Let there be an earth. Let there be a sun. Let there be birds. Let there be animals wander on their feet. Let there be man. Yeah. God gives orders. And those are his logoi. And he sends out his orders. And then there are creations, or lieutenants, you could call them, who carry out those orders. Yeah, God gives the order. It's just like a king. The king says, "Go and build me a castle," and the guys say, "Right, well, the king wants a castle built. We're going to get together. We're going to organize building a castle, and they'll get together the masons that are needed. They get together the money, the labor to haul stuff around. They'll build the castle. The king doesn't do it himself, but he makes it happen because he gives the order. So you have to understand that the logos is like this, the word, and the word is carried on the breath. So imagine that if you are a king and you're giving the order, your breath carries the words that make things happen. Now, that's a metaphor for the creation. Energy is sent out to create the universe, to create the cosmos, and you can think of this as a vast energy that comes out, and that energy can flow through space. And we can see with our big telescopes, we can see plasma streams that run for 1,000 light years, in a dead straight line, unbending. And astronomers scratch their head, wow, how the heck could that be happening? Yeah. And then the plasma can manifest itself into a galaxy. Within the galaxy, there are stars. And the stars have planets, and the planets can have moons. And it creates, if you like, a cascade, step by step, of the huge energy that powers multiples of thousands of galaxies. The energy to direct that would blow just one galaxy apart. But 1,000 galaxies together can hold it. And then the energy in one galaxy would blow one star apart if it went through it. So it has to be stepped down. So you have these step-down transformers or transformations of energy to bring it down step by step in voltage. So the voltage comes down through the galaxy to the individual star. The star sends it out to its planetary family.
Yep.
Yeah. And the planets can then take that energy. Our Earth is a charged body. It's not just a lump of Earth. It's not just an accident. It has an ionosphere or a magnetosphere. It's because it's a living body. And that energy can then transform lower into a form that plants can absorb as light. So the plants feed off the light. But we can't feed off the light. Only a little bit. We get a suntan.
There are actually people alive today that are breatharians, I think you call it. People that don't eat or even drink water. They just...
Oh, I'd like to meet one of them.
There was a guy, an Indian guy, that the BBC filmed, and they put him into a hospital room and filmed him 24/7 for 2 weeks, and he just walked out afterwards. No food, no water.
Well, let me carry on. So if you go into the John's Gospel, actually I could get it on the Kindle here. Let's see if I can find that. But the John's Gospel gives it to us very succinctly. And I'm going to see if I can find it.
By the way, everyone, if you've got questions for Adrian, please put them into capital letters, please, so I can find them in the chat.
Not too much on Arthur, please.
Okay. Try and avoid Arthur.
I've said enough on that subject. There we are, the Holy Bible. There we are. Right, let's see if I can get the chapter you want. Come on. John 1. Yes, here we go. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. So everything's made through the Logos. And without him was not anything made that was made. So you've got to have the Logos stream to make things. In him was life. So the life force was in the Logos. And the life was the light of men. So we associated life with light with the Logos. So this is the core of Christianity. Real Christianity is the Logos doctrine. Yeah. And when I was a boy, as I say, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. And this was before the Vatican Council II, which changed everything. But at the main thing for Catholics, they like performance drama. You know, so that people put on fancy clothes and they do a nice drama for them. We call it the Mass, right? And the last part of the Mass, they would actually read this out. Every Mass, beginning of they call it the last Gospel. It was considered so important that it was read every Sunday, and you would have to stand up for it. It wasn't explained to you. You think about this, and you look at it. What's this all about? Words and God, and light, and But you have to understand here. It says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And then it goes on. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. Oh, which John is he talking about? Is he talking about John the Baptist or himself? Yeah. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yeah. So the world's made through the Logos. We've been told that. But this man's coming into the world, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Now, I'm going to explain this to you because nobody else will. Yeah. The Logos is an energy, and you can think of it as like plasma in the air. And you can think of this is what they call the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. Spirit means breath. The Latin word spiritus is breath. You know, you inspire, you breathe in, expire, you breathe out. Respiration is repeating of breath. So breath is associated with life.
Yep.
You understand that? But there's gradations of what that breath is. Right? Just as you can have a solid thing that can be saturated with water, like a log of wood can be full of water, can't it? And water can have air dissolved in it. That's how the fish breathe. They breathe the air in the water. They don't breathe the water itself. So the air can be filled with spirit, the Holy Ghost, in the atmosphere. And the whole secret is about tuning in to different levels of the atmosphere, you know, to feed the higher parts of yourself. So as you breathe in, you're breathing in higher material than normal.
Right.
This is why you should have sanctuaries. Like a church should be a sanctuary where the atmosphere is kept very high. These days they play bingo in the hall, or they put up a helter-skelter, you know, in the nave. There's not going to be much Holy Ghost there then, because you debased it. But if you can raise the vibrational level of the space so that you're being
well, you could do that with acoustics, couldn't you?
Yes, that helps as well. Yes, absolutely. Those churches were built for that. Anyway, the ultimate thing you're aiming to do, how can I put this simply? I don't want to make it too complicated, but the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible is about how the human race became separated from the Logos stream.
Okay, yeah.
So we have to eat. It's all to do with eating the apple. You know, what are you going to eat? You have to plow the land to grow grain, so you have some food to eat. Because what your body does is it supports your mind. Yeah. And I refer to this as being your horse, and you, the true you, the higher you, as being the rider. But the rider is disconnected from the Logos stream. He's not like a cabbage. A cabbage can get its light and grow. Because you're not a cabbage, or not an oak tree, or not of that ilk, you have to eat, take it secondhand, either from other animals or from vegetation. In order for your body, your physical body to live, your body will then turn that food into electricity. And that electricity is the life force that keeps you or your brain alive. And your brain is then able to process or anchor your mind. So you're dependent on your body. But the whole purpose of self-development, true Christianity, is to establish the reconnection with the Logos. Unfortunately, and I'm giving it to you very in précis form, very condensed. And I talk about these things in much more depth in the college, but the situation you have is you're not connected. And for most people to connect directly like Jesus did, Jesus was connected, right? He melded his will with the will of the Father. He says this, you know, the Father's will and my will are one. Yeah, I know the Father, and So he completely gave up his ego to allow the Logos to suffuse him. So he became the vehicle of the Logos on earth. That's how he's able to do his miracles, because this energy was running through him. Yeah. Now you have to be very pure, very high to be able to do that. He came from a higher level down here to do that, even to the point of death, even to taking on death and then resurrecting. And that's a real thing. People, skeptics say, well, they just took the body out of a grave and they hid it and pretended it all. They were liars. They're all liars. Well, believe that if you like. But the whole point about the Christian faith is the idea that this man conquered death.
Sorry, Adrian, what convinces
death,
you that the resurrection is actually factual?
I've met him.
That's a good answer. Okay. Yeah, go on.
Anyway, Christians, when I was Catholic, people go to the church and they go to communion, and they stick their tongue out, put a host on their tongue. You're now eating the body of Christ. Priest has said magic words over it, and it's not. It might look like bread, it might taste like bread, but it's not. It's the body of Christ. Well, they're missing the point, because Christ is in everything, all the food that you eat, and it's understanding that the Logos stream animates. It's the force of life in everything, and he's saying you will not have life in you unless you eat me, is actually talking about being able to connect to the Logos stream. But what he provided was a possibility for us to connect to it through him. So you don't have to be a great guru. It's like he's providing the spaceship. You can get inside the spaceship, New Jerusalem it's called at the end of the Bible, and you'll be looked after inside the spaceship while you carry on growing. If you've got to get off the planet and do your own ascension, you get on the top of the Mount of Olives and right, here I am, I'm off to heaven.
Have you personally experienced the Logos energy yourself? You have?
Yes.
And
yes.
Could you tell us about that at all?
Well, I'll say a few words, but I look upon myself as being a sort of Lancelot. If you read the Grail legends, Lancelot gets a little sip. He's not good enough, he's not Galahad, he isn't Percival. He's not good enough to be the Grail Guardian full time, but he does get a little taste. And that's what I had. And I'm not going to go into it any further than that. I couldn't be and do what I'm doing now, because my job is to be with the people and to be able to do this work and to put it all together, the jigsaw puzzle I talk about, and to bring this knowledge into the world. That's my job. And I can't be out of the world, in a monastery somewhere, being very holy, and do that.
Okay.
So that's the situation for me. I'm hoping when my time comes to leave this planet that I'll be reconnected again. But for now, I couldn't do both.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. We've had a comment from Daniela Holland, who has said, we resurrect people now with electricity.
Yes, in a way. You resurrect their bodies, only if they're not too damaged. But that's with the consent of the soul of the person which will have left their body, and it's going to go back in.
Could we just return to Gurdjieff?
Yes.
So did Gurdjieff have any success in his search for the original teachings of Jesus?
I believe he did. I went on a quest in Turkey back in '95. My wife and I'd worked out that in his second book he wrote, which is called Meetings with Remarkable Men, he describes how he and his friend Bogassian, Gurdjieff was half Armenian, half Greek. And they found some letters, he says, in the ruins of Ani. Ani was the ancient capital of Armenia. And they did a little bit of archaeology there. This is back in the 1880s. You could probably do more then than you can now. Nobody really cares about old ruins then in that part of Turkey. Anyway, they found some letters written in very old form of Armenian, which they took to another city in Armenia called Alexandropol. I think it's called Gyumri now. And they found an Armenian scholar who could read this old version of Armenian. And it turned out it was written, these were letters between two priests, one in Ani and one in another place. And they were talking in these letters, was there anything remaining of this ancient school he calls the Sarmung Brotherhood? So Gurdjieff decided he was going to go on a quest to find the Sarmung Brotherhood, and he's very cryptic about it. And he and his friend, they go by foot. They go over, Mount Ararat or part of it, and get down to Kurdistan. And then he goes to a place he calls N. Well, he mentioned somewhere that these letters were written by a priest at the place called Nivsi. Nivssi. Looking on a map, Bennett had said he thought that this Nivsi was another name for Nineveh, which is by Mosul in Iraq. But Bennett was very into Sufism at that time. And I didn't think that was correct. Gurdjieff was not a Muslim, and he maybe visited one or two Sufi schools to find out what they talked about, but he was a Christian. He was a Christian mystic. I didn't think that was true. But looking on the map, I saw that there's a town called Nizibis, or called Nusebin now, but Nizibis was the old Roman name. And that B in bis can be a V in Latin very easily. So Nizibis, and that sounds very similar to me to Nivsi. So he said that he went to this place, N anyway, and he found a map there of what he calls, he stayed with an Armenian priest, he and his friend. His friend had been bitten by a spider and wasn't very well. So they stayed there for a couple of weeks. And this old priest showed him a map he had of what he called pre-sand Egypt. Gurdjieff was very excited by this map and what he saw of pre-sand Egypt. And he made a secret copy of it and sewed it into the lining of his jacket. And then he went off, he abandoned his search for the Sarmung Brotherhood and went off to Egypt. So I thought, what would be in this map? And this was just at the time, in 1994, we published the Orion Mystery. So 1995 was after that. And I thought, what's the map? Was it something similar to talking about Orion and the pyramids? That would make sort of sense. So I thought, we must go and have a look at this Nivsi. So my wife and I, we went to Urfa. It was called Sandy Urfa now, the ancient Edessa. And we also went to Carmagina. And you looked at some things there. I've written a lot about that. But we also went to this place, Nusebin. It was quite difficult to get there. It's right up on the border of Syria, very close to Iraq, in the far east of Turkey. And there's a time of there were still the Turks and Kurds, fighting it out. It's a bit like going to Northern Ireland in a bit of the Troubles, So it's a bit dangerous. But we went there. And we found this old church, and it had the priest's house on top of the church, like as a flat. So we went out, and the old woman showed us around and showed us the priest's house. I thought, yeah, this could very well be the place where they stayed. I didn't find any maps there, but enough to satisfy me that was what he was talking about. Well, I researched this whole subject much further, and I've written about it, but I'll give you the gist of it here. Back in 504 AD, the Emperor Zeno, at the time of the Byzantine Empire, expelled the school of the Persians, it's called, from Edessa, which is Urfa, for heresy. And they went across the border and they went to Nisibis, which was in the Persian Empire at that time. And they were allowed to stay there. So they had their famous school of the Persians there in Nisibis. And they were famous for their knowledge, particularly of astronomy. So the other thing they were, or the school from Nisibis, from Edessa that was expelled, they were diaphysites.
Sorry, what's that?
What does diaphysite mean? It's all to do with who was Jesus. The monophysites, most Christians today are monophysite. They believe that Jesus was God. He was born as God, one and the same as God, right from being when he was a baby, right up to the time he left the earth. One in substance, monophysite. Diophysites believe that Jesus was born as a man, but he became the vessel for this higher being, you call it the Christos, if you like, who manifested through him. So he became the vehicle for the Logos. And that was what the baptism was all about. When the dove
sorry,
descends
Adrian, just
on
to
him,
understand you properly there. So he wasn't born the Son of God. He became the Son of God.
Well, we're all sons of God. Yeah. But he took on a human form, and he had to then earn the right to become reconnected to the higher spirit working through him, the Holy Ghost. So you can imagine in most Christian schools or churches, this is heresy. I think it's called Manichaeism. So these guys were expelled for these Manichaean beliefs.
I'm just going to interrupt you one more time, and I'll try and shut up after that. It's interesting that I think that they were expelled from Edessa because we've got somebody in common, Ralph Ellis, who places the historical Jesus in Edessa, or being born. Well, that was his kingdom anyway, Edessa.
Yeah.
So I know you don't agree with that, do you? But that is...
I like Ralph as a man. I totally disagree with those ideas.
Maybe an interesting coincidence,
I'm sorry about that.
Perhaps.
Yeah. He's a nice guy, and I like him. We spent a weekend at Glastonbury hanging out together. Both were speakers at the conference there. Well, he has his ideas. I have mine. Edessa was certainly an important place in early Christianity. It claims to be the first city to become Christian, because Abgar, who was the ruler of Edessa, he had some kind of leprosy or something, and he wrote a letter to Jesus saying, "You can come here. Those Jews don't like you, but you'll be all right. You come to my little kingdom. We'll look after you." And Jesus writes back and says, "Well, thank you for your invitation. It's really appreciated, but I have my destiny to fulfill. But I'll send someone to you to heal you." So after the crucifixion and the resurrection and so on, a guy called Thaddeus is sent to Edessa, and he converts the king. He heals him of his disease, and he converts into Christianity, and Edessa becomes the first Christian city. So this is, that's all in the sort of apocryphal
Yeah, so
gospels.
we're talking
and things.
about Abgar the Fifth there, aren't we? And
Yes, Abgar the
yeah,
Great, he's often
Ralph
called.
will say
yeah.
that was a letter between father and son.
Well, that's Ralph for you.
Let's move on then.
Yeah, let's move on. Where are we going? Well, I think I've said enough about esoteric Christianity. Let me talk about the Invisible College a bit. What I've tried to do is to make these teachings widely available. And I've been researching all sorts of things. It's not just this. I've been to Mexico and I've researched a lot about what was going on there, a lot about esoteric Christianity here. I'm doing the series on France at the moment, as you know.
The Mysteries of the Fleur de Lis. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm putting all these lectures together, and the college itself, a lot of these lectures are available to anyone on YouTube. If they go to my YouTube channel, Adrian Gilbert 1, right, I think it is. Or is it Adrian G? Yeah, Adrian Gilbert 1. You'll find a lot of lectures there. Other lectures I'm restricting to the college, and the college has levels within it, as any college will do. The first level of membership, I'm using an analogy of chess here. So the first level is pawn, that's P-A-W-N, not P-O-R-N. Right? And the thing about the pawns is they have the ability to transform in chess. If they can get to the other end of the board, they can become whatever you want them to be. Queen, very often. They can become a knight if that's what you wanted. And there could be a time when you got your pawn to the other side of the board, and the knight, because of the peculiar move the knight makes, could put the enemy king into checkmate. It might be a reason we do that, but very rare. People always turn them into queens. But anyway, so the idea at the pawn level, the other thing about the pawns in the game of chess is they need to work together. If you a chess master, anyone who's good at chess looks after their pawns, because the pawns, they might be lowly, but when you have a rank of them, they guard each other. And, other pieces can't go and stand in front of the pawn. Yes, he can't take him, but the guy next to him can kill it. So, working with your pawns, a good player looks after every pawn. And losing just one pawn more than the other guy your opponent has lost can tip the game over. So you have to be very good working with them, and they need to work together as a team. So at the pawn level in this college, I give you lots of facts and lots of information and lots of, it's an extension really of the open lectures. Lots of fun and games. Interesting knowledge, interesting stuff about King Arthur, or now about French cathedrals or whatever. The next level I call the Knight level, K-N-I-G-H-T, and that's our round table, and that's the first stage really of people working on themselves, not just looking for fun and games knowledge. Excitement and bits of history you haven't heard before. This is really interesting stuff. I want to hear more about this. I'm sorry, I keep looking over this way because
that's all right. I've got used to it now.
The TV screen. There, I should be looking at the camera really, but anyway. In the next level, you're learning to refine yourself because you want to become in touch with these higher energies. And that's done by refinement. This is what alchemy is all about. And the level beyond that, I call the Baron level. That's like the rook or castle in chess. We've got a couple of guys who are officially in that level, but that's really more a courtesy title at the moment. They should be in the position to be able to do what I'm doing if they're at that level. at least in a satellite form. And then the last level I call the royal level, and that would mean true initiation. But that's still, that's something to think about in the future. Will it ever happen? Maybe. But if you can even get as far as realizing the night level for real, see, the next level, the barren level, is really the quest for the Grail. The King Arthur's Round Table. As I said, I'm not really that interested in King Arthur historically. I've done all that work on the Holy Kingdom. But to me, what matters is, did he have a school? What was the Round Table all about? And I believe that, to answer the questions that you were talking about last week, I believe that there were two King Arthurs. I don't agree with Wilson and Blackett that the second Arthur was the sixth generational descendant of the first one, who's son of Magnus Maximus. I didn't know enough about the subject to be able to query that at the time. I just had to, I was there to take their work and put it into a form which was understandable and cohesive, which I did. I now go with the idea that there was an earlier Arthur who was from Cornwall and who was connected with the Royal House of Brittany, the Uther Pendragon, or Aurelius, his brother, all of that. And I'm not going to that here, but I believe that is the one, that's the battles, Arthur, the 12 battles, is to do with that one. And that he was very likely buried on Monothigaia, right? But I'm not going to talk about too much with that. But the second Arthur, Arthurus, well, you find that spelled all sorts of ways when you go into the genealogy. It can be Arthurus or Arthurus or Arthur. There are lots of different ways they spell it. I'm sorry, it's not always, it's not spelled Arthur, so it can't be Arthur. Well, it was Artorius.
So how do we know that Arthurus was Arthur? Why do you think that?
Well, it's a name.
But how is it the same name? How is it the same name?
Well, most people, we go into the texts and so on. It's understood that he's the same, right? You also get Arthmael. There's lots of these names, but think of Arthur, Arthurus. That's not so very different from Arthurus. That W is an U sound. So Arthurus. It's people wrote as they spoke. They didn't have a dictionary to say, how do I spell Arthur? They write down what they think, and it's different places will write it different ways because they all had dialects. And Welsh was not one language at that time. I know it in general, but it wasn't, I think, until the 19th century they started putting together a dictionary and standardizing.
So back in the Dark Ages, there were various what's the word I'm looking for? Dialects. Thank you. Various dialects of Welsh. Okay.
Yeah, the dialects up north were different from the south. I'm not a Welsh speaker, but some people use ap, meaning son of. Other places are so map with an M. So there's these differences. I'm not a Welsh speaker, so I'm not going to stick my neck out too far on that. But I think most people would agree they didn't have standardization of spelling until quite modern times, which they now teach in schools, of course. But that's not unique. It's the same in Italian. I was in Italy last time with my Italian friends. They're saying, well, Italian's a new language. There were all sorts of different dialects, and they sort of amalgamated them to make standard Italian. So this is what happens in the real world. And if you go to looking into the various genealogies, Jesus College 20 manuscripts and so on, and you can compare the spellings of different names in the genealogies, you find them often wildly different. But that is actually the same guy. because you see the
Yeah,
sequence
that
of
is
the
true, yeah.
names. So anyway, that's enough said on that subject.
Okay.
So
I think probably, Adrian, if you don't mind, we're over an hour and a half now.
we're down
Well,
to
we
do that
normally
long?
do an hour, so we're well over the usual
Oh.
time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have to stop
Oh.
there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I need to stop as well.
Well, I could talk to you for hours, but yeah, we best
Yeah.
stop there. Hopefully, I can get you back on
Yeah.
again in the not too distant future.
Yeah, we'll have a chat.
That would be
chat
lovely.
some other
Great.
time.
Okay. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Anyway, tell people how they can contact me. The
Yes.
Patreon page, the
I haven't
YouTube
done it
page.
yet, but I'll put all the links after we finish
Yeah.
talking. I'll put all the links underneath this.
If they want my email address, I'm very open to responding to
Adrian.
emails. Just send me an email at gilbertadrian@hotmail.com.
Yes,
Simple,
brilliant.
isn't
Okay.
it?
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it. Hope we can do it again. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please join me again next week for episode 39 of the History CV of Britain, when my guest will be Charles Alan Gunter, and he'll be talking to us about his take on King Arthur. Okay. Thanks, Adrian. Cheers, everyone.
Okay. All right.